Thanks, Lee. Well, welcome everybody to May's Manuscript Mondays. So, the Manuscript Society has a mission to encourage the collection and preservation of manuscripts and documents, stimulate and aid collectors in their various collecting specialties, facilitate the exchange of information and knowledge among collectors, scholars, dealers, and the general public, and to promote the highest professional and ethical standards. The society was founded in 1948 as the National Society of Autograph Collectors, but it does not include just collectors, but also manuscript curators, librarians, dealers, and auction houses, and now has members throughout the world, including in Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, and South America. It publishes in addition to Manuscript Mondays, it publishes the Manuscript Society publishes a quarterly journal titled The Manuscripts and a quarterly newsletter titled The Manuscript Society News. It also has a scholarship program available for graduate students. The Richard Mass Research Grant, the deadline for this past year has ended, but there'll be one available, I believe, keep an eye out for that early next year. We also hold annual meetings, and they're really wonderful. We had a great meeting in New York and saw some wonderful archives, libraries, and museums, really behind the scenes. Next year, we will be in Boston. And the year after that, we're planning to be in Chicago. So they're wonderful meetings, great food, great people to visit with, and get to see stuff in archives and libraries that regular researchers and visitors don't go to see. We're in for a special treat tonight. Sarah Funke Butler, Funke Literary is here, and she's going to be talking about letters between Ernest Hemingway and Lillian Ross. I first heard Sarah talk about this when I was driving to DC, stuck in traffic, found a podcast called Rare Book Chat, and even though I was stuck in traffic for an hour or 2 hours, it was the first time I never got upset or angry. Sarah is a literary agency, has a literary agency, Funke Literary, with a specialty in archives and archival material, especially related to the 20th century literature, the arts, and feminism. She represents authors and literary estates on placing their archives into institution and aids private collectors in developing the collections. She holds a degree from Harvard with a concentration in English and American literature and language. Specializing in 20th century American literature, she also has a master's in library science with a specialty in rare books and archives. So, without further ado, Sarah, take it away.
All right, thank you, Jay. Just sharing my screen here. Thank you all for having me, and thank you for showing up to hear about this topic. It's one of my favorites, or three of my favorites: archives, Lillian Ross, and her work and her relationship with Ernest Hemingway, and if we've got time, Salinger also. And already we're going to save some time because Jay gave me such a lovely introduction. My name is Sarah Funke Butler. My company is Funke Literary. And I work with authors and estates to place their archives and institutions through gift or sale. And I help private collectors develop research collections, including scribe books and archival material. Through this business, several years ago, I had the honor of representing the estate of Lillian Ross in the sale of her archive to the Houghton Library at Harvard. I knew that working with Ross's papers would be a career highlight for me, being able to uncover the process of the mind behind the first wave of the new journalism. Ross, of course, invented the idea of applying to journalistic narrative the tools of fiction, creating nonfiction novels, creating full round characters, using literary description, using dialogue, and using all the tools we're used to seeing in fiction. Woolf, Talese, Didion, Hunter Thompson, Truman Capote, especially Truman Capote is worth noting, all followed Ross. In Cold Blood was published in 1966, 14 years after Ross published Picture in The New Yorker and in book form. Ross's archive soon became a personal addiction for me, going through her 50 boxes of material, box by box, file by file, page by page, I started to understand the attraction felt by so many of the people she encountered in person, as well as those who knew her mostly through her writing and through correspondence. Ernest Hemingway's friendship with Ross was formed almost exclusively through their exchange of letters. They only met a few times in person. I'm saying a few, I only know of two times, but I think there might have been one or two more. Um, Before turning our attention over to those letters, which I know are the main event, it is worth taking a couple of minutes to provide some context out of which her profile of Hemingway grew, and her reputation. Lillian Ross began in the New Yorker in 1945, writing talk of the town pieces with a voice that still echoes through that column today. She met Hemingway on Christmas Eve in 1947 at his home in Ketchum, Idaho. Sidney Franklin, the Brooklyn-born bullfighter about whom she was writing a New Yorker profile, made the introduction towards helping Ross research the piece on himself. Ross and Hemingway became avid correspondents about bullfighting and about much more, and their friendship grew very quickly out of those letters. By this time, Ross had a lot of eyes on her work prior to her publication of Hemingway, of the profile on Hemingway, and it's important to keep that in mind. Early in 1948, Ross made the rounds of Hollywood, publishing a piece on the House Un-American Activities Committee in February of 1948. She continued working on her profile of Sidney Franklin throughout that year, publishing it in two parts in March of 1949. That piece got her a lot of attention, including from Hollywood. Gene Kelly sent her a telegram asking for the screen rights that he wanted to show to his studio. Nothing came of that, but she was, she had a lot of attention from people in Hollywood and elsewhere for her writing, and they were eager to see what she would do next. By that summer, she was engaged on a project with John Huston, with whom she had spent a good deal of time. He announced through an interview in a paper that she was going to tour the world with him. That didn't end up happening, but they did work on another project together that she came up with. The profile that she did on Hemingway was called How Do You Like It Now, Gentlemen? It was published in May of 1950, and that would lead to sold-out newsstands, public controversy, and it would lay the groundwork for the modern celebrity profile. The project she did with John Huston, ultimately called Picture, with that she created a new genre. Whether you come to Ross through Picture, Hemingway, her hundreds of talk pieces in the New Yorker over several decades, or through something else, I'd like to give you just an express tour of her archive so you'll understand the scope of her work and where the Hemingway profile fits into all of that. Like most archives, Lillian Ross's holds correspondence. A lot of correspondence. Unlike most archives, her correspondence runs 7 decades and includes typed carbons of much of her own outgoing letters. Most literary archives hold evidence of a literary community. Lillian's community was really spectacular. She was mentored by New Yorker co-founder Harold Ross, no relation. She was edited by William Shawn, who became her companion for 40 years. Hemingway considered her a friend and a peer, as much as, if not more, after she published the profile on him. By the time Hemingway died in 1961, Ross had become close friends with J.D. Salinger. The likes of Truman Capote, Tom Wolfe, and John Updike provided active counterpoints to Ross's work, and they're present in her archive as well. In addition to Picture, Ross published The Player, a collection of her interviews with actors, accompanied by her own photographs. She was a prolific photographer, and a great deal of cutting room floor material is filed in the boxes in her archive. Her comic psychoanalytic novel, Vertical and Horizontal, led to a collaboration with the Young Merchant Ivory team before they were so broadly known in the United States. That script that she worked with them on never made it to film. A movie she wrote and directed about the New York City school children called Dancers in May did. Other works followed: nonfiction, short fiction, scripts and screenplays for film, for TV, for theater, and more. Ross recorded her day-to-day work and her life in hundreds of tiny reporter notebooks. in date books and planners, and in some incredibly detailed journals of meetings and phone calls, of which I sadly only have this really spooky photo. The original Hemingway letters are not present in her archive. The estate opted to keep them separate. Um, all of her Hemingway files are in her archive at the Houghton Library. They contain her research, notes, and drafts, and correspondence for the profile, for his book publication after his death, for her foreword, which was drawn from the obituary she prepared for the BBC. She had files relating to the work of and with various other scholars who were studying and writing on Hemingway. Okay, now we can leave the archive and move on to the letters. This slide gives you a bit of a chronology of the time during which they were writing to each other and when their relationship developed. It's just to give you the collection by the numbers, it's a collection of approximately 80 dense, deep, personal, very rich letters documenting Hemingway's relationship with Ross, composed while he was running across the river and into the trees, and the old man in the sea. The correspondence bulks to 1948 to 1952, with nearly 70 of the 80 letters composed during those years. Filling out the dialogue are letters addressing his 1953 Pulitzer Prize, the two 1954 plane crashes within days of each other, and his recovery or partial recovery from those crashes, as well as the 1954 Nobel Prize. 27 of these letters predate the May 1950 publication of Ross's profile, How Do You Like It Now, Gentlemen? They share information and commentary that would color the piece. That is why Hemingway wrote a lot of those letters. He was first trying to help her with her piece about the bullfighter, Sidney Franklin, and then he wanted to share a lot of information with her. And they talked about whether or not she could ever do a profile on him. Between the time of the publication and the end of that year, which is 7 months, Hemingway sent Ross 22 more letters, totaling 42 pages. Hemingway's topics range from the minutiae of his work, including word counts while he's writing The Old Man and the Sea, his day-to-day activities such as hunting and fishing and reading and boxing, his introspective look at his family relationships. He talks about the loss of a grandchild right after birth. He writes about his moods when he's really excited and doing well with his writing, his moods when he's waiting for proofs to come from his publisher, his moods when he's waiting for books to come out and after they come out. He writes a lot about the loneliness of the writing life. He writes about his wartime experiences. He writes about public events. He writes about the futility of death. He was not above sharing stories and views of his friends and of his rivals in any sphere, especially, of course, in writing. Hemingway admired Ross's work and her work ethic, and he supported her writing completely. He even suggested at one point that she collect her published pieces into book form and let him write an introduction. He was less supportive of the way in which she threw herself into her work sometimes, especially when she went to Hollywood to work with John Huston and she threw herself into that culture. He admonished her to lay off drinking and gambling. In February 1950, he wrote, "It's all right to go out there and study the sewer, but you don't have to drink out of it." Ross preserved, along with her letters, 2 lucky stones that Hemingway sent her. He explained in a letter, "Lucky stone is what Indians think is lucky stone. I think the same way, but can't explain and certainly can't prove." He did say he'd carry them around a little extra to make them even more lucky for her before sending them with a letter. Throughout the letters, Hemingway is warm, he's intimate, posturing as a mentor, often addressing Ross as daughter, writing to her as a friend and as a peer. He signs the first letter in full, formally Ernest Hemingway. After that, he starts writing your pal and adding a lot of nicknames and endearments. Here are some of my favorites. And these are only some because it looks like a lot, but keep in mind there are 80 letters. There's Hemingstein, Hugo von Huxmanship, Huxmanship von Hemingstein, H. Von H., Hugo von Hucksmanship, Mr. Papa, Huck with some little mountains, which she interpreted as his own version of an Indian symbol. He signs many of the letters love with some form of love, much love, an excuse bad letter, much love, wish you were here anyway, love, um, very much love, much love, much love, best love, H. Von H. Um, let's see, please write, much love, daughter, all my love, whatever that is. Your pal, Honest Ernie, love and good luck, best love always. This one is pretty great. Most of the letters are typed, but there's some autographed postscripts here and there. He says, have a good time and don't ever worry about anything. Just let your work develop in you like a congenial abscess. I really just wish this were a Zoom where I could hear if people think these are funny or not. Um, all right, well, you can read these as well as I can. Huck von Hemmenstein, Hugo von Huck again. Uh, please have a lovely time and know how fond I am of you and how proud I am of you, even if neither one of us won the Nobel Prize. That's a good one, obviously before 1954. Uh, all right, moving on. One of Hemingway's favorite topics is his correspondence with Ross. So he's just writing about the letters. Let me move this out of my way here. Okay. In 1949, he tells her that the communication is the best invention since penicillin, and he wonders what he did before he wrote to her. He adds, letter writers are about extinct. You and me may be the last of them, except for Don Powell. In 1950, he writes, anyway, I'm no good and worthless, but please write me quick if you have time, because I'm bad low. Don't need to hit any couch to know the causes either. Boredom, pride, and disgust. I suppose they're all curable. He writes with a sense of respect for Ross. You write funny and good and always loving and kind and like we're entries in a race that wasn't going to the swift, but to the honest. I love to write you and get letters from you. When he fails to hear from her in a timely fashion, he gets anxious. How are you, he writes. I get worried not hearing. When he fails to write to her in a timely fashion himself, he gets annoyed because he can't expect a letter from her unless he writes one first. He explains in August 1954, 7 months after his plane crash and almost 10 months after his last letter to her. This is the quote on the slide. I'm awfully sorry not to have written for so long. Was pretty beat up and didn't want to write gloomy letters. Then, as soon as I started getting in shape, had so much to do that I couldn't write. Then started working good and let everything else go to hell. Sorry that I haven't written, and I hope you will know it was not carelessness, nor not being fond of you as ever. I just had to ration what I had until I built up a reserve, and I had to drop letters. When you stop writing them, you don't get them, and that makes it lonely. So you forgive me if you can, and please write if you have time, because I always miss you, and I miss the letters. In letter after letter to Ross, Hemingway reveals a sense of kinship, a reaching out to someone whom he can mentor and who can comfort him through her understanding of his writer's life. I trust you as I should trust no one. I wish to Christ you were here to read this now. If you want to know how lonely a man can be when his damn book comes out, you could bring down your lonely detector and make some accurate readings. Being lonely is an occupational disease, as you pointed out. Christ, but I love to write. But then to have all that stuff afterwards. But then what the hell? It is a more or less permanent medium, and it all evens up. Please write. I will be lonelier than I always am when there is no one here. License to Carry. I drew the title of this presentation from a letter Hemingway sent Ross upon publication of the second of her 4 weekly installments of her picture series. It was then still called number 1512, about John Huston's film adaptation of Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage. This is that letter, a small portion of the letter. He just, I feel like I've left something out here. She's just spent a year and a half with John Huston, following him around on set, living with him and with the actors and with the crew towards this film adaptation of Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage. She's publishing this in 4 weekly installments in the New Yorker, and the same year it will come out as a book. This is really the foundation for the new journalism. And this is a book that's on every syllabus for every film school. It's on a lot of lists for top journalism of the 20th century. This is what Hemingway says when he sees the second installment of the piece. Have you got a license to carry a pistol yet? I think that is the next step indicated. Although probably by the fourth installment, they all will have suicided or be producing anonymously in Tangier. Lots of people wrote me that I had no choice but to go out and hang myself after the piece about me, but they didn't know that you were my good friend and were putting me in the best possible light. I wish you wouldn't retire and would do full length pieces on both the Democratic and Republican candidates. Imagine if, for the first time in history, as a result of a single profile in the New Yorker, neither major candidate polled a single vote across the country. That would be sort of epoch making. Then you could study Russian and do a day with Uncle Joe Stalin, and the Soviets would fold overnight. Don't you retire, daughter. Your country needs you. Keep in mind that he wrote this letter 2 full years after the Hemingway profile appeared. He sounds like he's finally gotten over it. Either that or he really hasn't. I'm not sure. But in considering the profile before she wrote it, while they're just conceiving of it, he'd written to her daughter, which he often addressed her as, "Daughter, I don't know about the piece. I probably couldn't talk good enough to make it worthwhile. But it would be fun to do it if you did it. If you do write the piece, you might tell them straight. What I tell you is straight." After he agreed to do it, and they had spent their 2 days together in New York, but before he saw the proofs, he wrote to her as soon as he left New York, "You were fine about the piece, never crowding, and I'm a crowder." He added, "You can write any goddamn thing you want, except we must avoid libel and hurting people and get the names right." Eventually, she finished the piece. She sent him the proofs, which was the practice back then. I don't think it is now. Those original long galleys, with a few of his notes and Mary's notes, are with the letters in this collection. His initial reaction to the proofs was somewhat cold. He wrote, "I will say nothing about the piece because according to my code, if you change, alter, or correct, then you authorize a piece. Hope I don't talk that way, but if that is how it sounds to you, then you have a perfect right to write it that way. It will teach me to keep my mouth shut anyway, which should be a break for everybody except perhaps visiting ornithologists and or ichthyologists." He makes one request to delete any reference to his mother. Half an hour later, having reread the piece, he writes on the same letter, so he is not really disavowing what he's written before, but this is what he adds. "It's a good, funny, well-intentioned, well-inventioned piece. He predicts accurately, peace will make me many, many enemies who will think I am a conceited son of a bitch who goes around talking like that all the time and has delusions of grandeur. But I guess any enemy is not nearly as dangerous, basically, as a friend." He explains his earlier reaction. "When I read it last night, I was disappointed because I only look for what is wrong. We talk a sort of joke language at Funke, which was his home in Cuba, which originally started as Bahama Negro dialect. And I suppose I must still have been talking that way. At the airport, I was pretty groggy and I was trying to do everything very slow and kid my way out of it." In reaction to the questions she put to him on the proofs themselves, he addresses a few mysterious biographical facts, such as scars on his face and a logo on his luggage. Let's skip origin of alterations to my face and put them all down to cutting myself while shaving. The brand is a private thing and I would feel chicken to explain it. He thanks her for laying off the war and all the things you could have written that people don't know, and adds in autograph, again, that's a typed letter, and he adds a postscript, "Thanks for being nice to Wolfie," the friend that they had encountered in Abercrombie and Fitch. Mary adds in autograph, "Compliments on fine piece." Hard to know what that means or how Mary took it. After the publication of the profile, Hemingway doubled down on his friendship with Ross, writing more frequently, at greater length, just as intimately. But he mentioned this piece all the time. I'm going to see how we're doing for time. All right, I'm not going to read all of these to you. Suffice it to say, he's writing, so the piece comes out early May. A month later, he says he loses, I thought your piece was a good, straight, okay piece, but I lose about a friend a day on it. He tries to justify all of this 2 weeks later. Don't worry about me losing friends or anything about it. You don't have to defend me. 2 months later, everybody wrote me and tried to get me to say something against your profile. I told them all that you had a right to write anything you wished about me and we're good friends. Actually, good old profile made me about as many enemies as we have in North Korea, but who gives a shit? A man should be known by the enemies he keeps. 6 weeks after that, he likens critics of his work to the stupid people who misunderstood the profile. They thought your piece on me was a devastating attack, absolutely successful in showing what a son of a bitch I was and what wickedness I had ever done to make you hate me so. So I think we can write them off as malignant stupids. And then he writes her a poem entitled To Lillian on the Coast, mostly just a bunch of digs at Hollywood. Has he gotten over it? By the end of the year, he has not. Over a year later, he is getting tired of reading how she devastated, destroyed him, and did irreparable harm. You're probably getting tired of listening to me read all of this. He says, let's drop the damn thing. I don't think I always talk the way I talked sometimes in the profile, but I was so damn tired and overworked that maybe I did. All right, he says, drop the damn thing. Do we think he dropped it? Nope, he did not drop it. 2 years later, people are always surprised to find we're not enemies. Huh. Even after he gets a Nobel Prize, he has the Nobel Prize. He writes to her in 1955. Lately, even more horrible people come down here, criticals and others. All are very astonished because I don't hold anything against you, who made the effort to destroy me, and nearly did, they say. I didn't realize, of course, how near I was destroyed, due to my traumatic lesions, I read, from his plane crashes, which were on top of at least 8 concussions from previous activities. I always tell them, how can I be destroyed by a woman when she is a friend of mine, and we've never even been to bed, and no money has changed hands? All right. As recent discussions in the New Yorker attest, How Do You Like It Now, Gentlemen is still 75 years later, in some ways a cipher for both Ross and Hemingway. Hopefully a lot of you are familiar with the original profile from 1950. Adam Gopnik wrote a piece earlier this year in light of the 100th anniversary of the New Yorker, just talking about the history of the profile and its reception and its context. And it's still interesting. People still want to talk about what it meant, what Lillian meant. Why did Hemingway react or not react the way he did? This slide shows a fan letter that was written in 1950 from a reader. I always love to share this whenever I talk about Ross's work. Dear Miss Ross, had the eeriest experience. Right in the middle of washing the clothes, cleaning the house, and 8 million other confining chores, attendant upon caring for a couple of children, I spent through you a couple of days with Ernest Hemingway. Thanks. Thanks an awful lot. It's signed Bobette Cohen, 225 East 74th Street, New York, New York. If we can accept Ross's Hemingway profile as something that simple, as a way to spend a couple of days with Ernest Hemingway, we might better devote our attention to all of these letters from Hemingway to Ross. The letters serve as a running diary of Hemingway's mature years, during which he wrote the last 2 books he'd published in his lifetime, Across the River and Into the Trees in 1950 and The Old Man in the Sea in 1952, garnering him the Pulitzer Prize in 1953 and, of course, the Nobel in 1954. The letters establish a previously unexplored relationship important to both Ross and Hemingway during pivotal times in both their lives and careers. And yet, this friendship is barely touched on in Hemingway biographies, was completely ignored in Ken Burns's 2021 six-hour documentary on Hemingway's life and work. Only 2 of these letters have been published. This correspondence shows, among other things, many other things, that Hemingway, who has become the poster child for toxic masculinity, was indeed capable of having a serious and profound platonic relationship with a young woman. He relied on Ross as a significant correspondent with whom to share his thoughts and life. He mentored her work, secured for her her growing celebrity by allowing the profile to begin with, and he validated her position by holding fast to their friendship. I seem to have spent all of my time on Ross and Hemingway, and I didn't leave enough time for Salinger's 80 plus letters to Ross, which pick up, they start in 1957 and go through the 1990s. So what I want to end with is their first exchange, which is in May of 1957. Hemingway is still alive, but is writing almost not at all to Ross, really hardly to anyone. His final letter to her is in 1961, a few months before he dies. Anyway, in May of 1957, Ross sent a brief fan letter to Salinger, who was then edited by William Shawn and a friend of Shawn's. Salinger wrote back to Ross, pleasantly enough, thanking her for the compliment, took the letter out of his typewriter, signed it, and then, as you can see in this partially covered up for Salinger estate pleasing reasons, he put it back in his typewriter as an afterthought and typed a bit more. What he typed back to her was his own fan letter to her about the Hemingway profile. Years ago, this is just the postscript, not the letter. Years ago, I was riding in a car with someone who thought your Hemingway profile merciless. I had the pleasure of arguing him down. It was a true and properly sad profile, and the only thing merciless about it was reality itself. I knew Hemingway slightly during the war. He insisted on telling me about Scott Fitzgerald's sex life, or sex troubles. That is, as soon as he suspected that I liked The Great Gatsby either as well as or more than The Sun Also Rises. I was touched, as well as dismayed, that he felt the need, and I like the need as capital N, need, to try to disenchant me. I think the safari through Abercrombie and Fitch must have touched you in the same way, and that's what my friend didn't see. I hope you don't let readers get you down. I know this was a lot in a short space of time. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, questions, comments. This would have taken, and we do have lots of time for questions and comments because I think I read it double time. But thank you for being here and listening. And if Jay wants to pop back on, I'd love to chat.
Thanks, Sarah. That was wonderful.